As a new ER nurse, mastering the medications you're going to be seeing often is crucial. So we're going to talk about some of the more important ones here today. We're going to go over the rapid sequence intubation medications, some of the cardiac medications, the sedation meds we use for when patients are intubated, a lot of the vasopressors, and even the psych meds you're going to see when patients are combative and very agitated. Of course, a lot of these meds, a lot of them, all of them are going to come from the book, and we go more in depth in the book and then tie them to the real world scenarios as well in the book. But let's break them down here for you. So for rapid sequence intubation, we know that the main medications we're going to see are etomidate, succinylcholine, and rocuronium. As you know, with rapid sequence intubation, we're going to give a sedative medication first, followed by a paralytic, right? Because you don't want to paralyze someone and then they are still awake while fully paralyzed and getting a tube shoved down their throat for intubation, right? So you're going to sedate them first, and that's why etomidate is the main sedative you're going to see, and succinylcholine and rocuronium are going to be the main paralytics that you see. We use etomidate because it's hemodynamically stable. It's not going to lower the blood pressure. It's not going to increase the heart rate. It's not going to do any of that stuff. That's why it's hemodynamically stable. Succinylcholine and rocuronium are the two main paralytics used. Succinylcholine is typically preferred because it has a fast onset and a short duration, but it can cause hyperkalemia. So it's going to be avoided in renal patients, in burn patients, and rhabdomyolysis patients. So when succinylcholine is contraindicated, the providers are going to use rocuronium. The thing with rocuronium, however, is that it does have a longer onset and a longer duration, but it doesn't come with that hyperkalemia side effect. But just be aware that it does last longer. So next time your patient is going to get intubated, you're immediately thinking of etomidate and succinylcholine or rocuronium. Now, let's move on to the medications that you're going to see for sedation and analgesia for your intubated patient. The first one you should immediately think of is propofol. It's a classic medication for sedation. It has a fast onset and a short duration. So it's great for your neuro patient, and overall, it's great because if you turn it off, the sedation effects were off within 10 to 15 minutes. But the main thing that you must be mindful of is that it can lower the blood pressure. So once you start this medication, you need to set the blood pressures to take every 5 minutes so you can gauge how your patient is responding to it. Now, the second one is going to be Versed. You should be mindful and understand Versed as well. It's going to be used when patients are hemodynamically unstable. If the blood pressure is already low for a patient, you're not going to use propofol because it's going to further drive the blood pressure down. So providers may order Versed instead. Just know that with Versed, it does take a longer time for it to wear off. It can take up to an hour for the effects to wear off once it's turned off. Now, when you're intubated, you're going to have all these tubes, everything placed in you. You don't just want a patient to be sedated. You also want something for analgesia on board. And typically, it's going to be an infusion of fentanyl that's ordered. So after your patient gets intubated, you're going to ask the providers, what do you want for sedation and analgesia? They're typically going to say propofol and fentanyl or Versed and fentanyl. So just be mindful of that for the future. Another key section of medications that you must know are blood pressure lowering medications. And these are some of the key ones. We have the first one is nitroglycerin. Nitroglycerin, as you know, decreases preload and afterload. That's why it can be used in ACS. ACS, as you know, consists of STEMIs and STEMIs, unstable angina. We have heart failure exacerbation. Nitroglycerin is great for heart failure exacerbation where you want to reduce the preload and afterload to ease the workload on the heart. It's going to be used for cardiac related hypertensive emergencies. Another key medication to lower the blood pressure is going to be nicardipine. It's an infusion of a calcium channel blocker to help bring that blood pressure down, and you're going to see this for strokes and for brain bleeds. So next time a patient comes in for a brain bleed and they're hypertensive, you can already anticipate the providers are going to order nicardipine as an infusion to bring the blood pressure down and help it control. For brain bleeds, the blood pressure gold standard is to have it around 140, systolic 140 or a little less. Now, the next medication is labetalol. It's going to be a slow IV push, particularly in stroke patients and brain bleed patients. The nicardipine is an infusion that's going to help the patient stay at the desired blood pressure goal. But labetalol is going to be an IV push. You're thinking, well, why aren't they just ordering nicardipine? Well, if you're, let's say, in CT and the patient, you just got the head CT, just got the non-con, the patient's a candidate for ischemic therapy for they're an ischemic stroke, it's going to be easier to go and get a labetalol push to bring the blood pressure down if the patient doesn't meet the thrombolytic criteria because they're too hypertensive. It's easier to go get the labetalol and to give the push, bring the blood pressure down, and then they're a candidate for the thrombolytics instead of going, getting the nicardipine, priming it, getting a pump, etc., etc. If labetalol is ordered, the typical dosing is 10 milligrams or 20 milligrams IV. It is a beta blocker, so just because the patient is hypertensive doesn't mean you're going to give it if the heart rate is low. So if the heart rate's anywhere below 60, you need to talk to the provider and say, hey, the heart rate is below 60 or nearing 60. Do you still want to give labetalol? And if it's below 60, you're not administering this, right? Because you don't want to give it for one thing and create another issue. Another medication that you must know is hydrolysine. It's sometimes unpredictable as far as how it's going to affect how much it's going to affect the blood pressure, but it is often ordered and you typically going to be used as a second line to labetalol. So nicardipine, labetalol, hydrolysine, and then nitroglycerin are some of the key blood lower pressure medications you should be aware of. Next, we're going to talk about heart rate medications. We have diltiazem, metoprolol, esmolol, and amiodarone. Diltiazem and metoprolol are going to be used with atrial fibrillation with a rapid ventricular response. Diltiazem is a calcium channel blocker. Metoprolol is a beta blocker. So they're typically going to be doing the IV dose and then a PO dose. So if the IV dose works, then it's followed by a PO dose for longer control. For diltiazem, in adults, the providers are typically going to order around 20 milligrams. It's going to be slow. You're going to give it very slow, cycle the blood pressure, and then if it works, you follow by a PO dose. For metoprolol, the same thing. It's going to be given with IV dose, typically 2.5 to 5 milligrams, and if that works, it's followed by a PO dose of metoprolol for long-lasting effects. If a patient, let's say, overdose on diltiazem, which you know is a calcium channel blocker, what would the management be? It would be to give a calcium chloride, where you give more calcium to counterbalance. If a patient overdoses on metoprolol and they're coming in for bradycardia, you know that the first line medication of symptomatic bradycardia is atropine. But the antidote for metoprolol would be glucagon, right? And if you're giving glucagon, you know it's going to cause nausea, so you're going to be giving Zofran with it as well. Esmolol is another key beta blocker that you must know. It has a fast on, fast off property. It's going to be an infusion, and the main reason you're going to be giving it in the ER is for aortic dissection. Another key heart rate medication that you must know, it's an antiarrhythmic, but it's crucial for lowering heart rate sometimes, specifically with atrial fibrillation with a rapid ventricular response. It's typically used for ventricular tachycardia with the pulse. It's going to be ordered with ALS for advanced life support, with ventricular tachycardia without a pulse for ventricular fibrillation. But amiodarone is a must-know antiarrhythmic that you should know. In cardiac arrest, you know, the first dose is 300 milligrams. If a second dose is needed, it's going to be 150 milligrams. And if it's ordered for atrial fibrillation with a rapid ventricular response, you know that it's going to be an infusion protocol. It starts with 150 milligrams over 10 minutes and then followed by an infusion afterwards. Moving on, we have TNK, right? TNK is one of the main thrombolytics used. The other one is TPA, but I see that a lot of the facilities are moving more towards TNK because it's easier to calculate the dose, and then you administer very easily because you're just giving the IV push administration of it. While TPA, you have to do calculations, you have to waste 10% of it, you have to give a little bit of it fast, and then the rest over like an hour. So TNK is what a lot of facilities are moving more towards. Tenecteplase, TNK is a thrombolytic that you're going to be using for ischemic strokes. We know that for ischemic strokes, we have a 4.5-hour window from symptom onset to administer TNK. Another use for TNK that can be ordered by the providers are for very sick pulmonary embolisms. A lot of the times for PEs, if they're stable enough, they just go on a heparin drip. If the clot is big enough, they're going to go maybe to IR to have the clot removed. But if they're crashing on you in the ER, a lot of the times the providers may order a thrombolytic to help break that clot down and restore perfusion, restore oxygenation to the blood. You must know the contraindications for thrombolytics, like recent brain trauma, recent surgery, history of brain tumors or brain aneurysms, prior ischemic strokes. A lot of the contraindications, you should know them so that you understand what to watch out for and when thrombolytics should not be given. Now, for pressors are crucial for you as a new ER nurse to master. The first one is going to be epinephrine. It increases the heart rate, the blood pressure, and the heart's contractility. Norepinephrine increases the blood pressure, but with also a little bit of help on the heart rate and contractility. Phenylephrine purely increases the blood pressure. Vasopressin purely increases the blood pressure. Dopamine is unpredictable as far as the dosing, but on the higher doses of it, it will increase the heart rate, the blood pressure, and the heart's contraction. And then dobutamine is primarily to help the heart contract a little better. Epinephrine has a lot of uses. It's going to be used in anaphylaxis, right? Because it's alpha 1, beta 2 properties. It's going to be used in cardiac arrest. And then norepinephrine, moving on, is going to be used for a lot as a first line agent for many conditions, but immediately you should be thinking of it for septic shock. Phenylephrine, a lot of the times, is added on after other medications have not worked. For example, after norepinephrine has not worked, vasopressin has not worked, epinephrine hasn't worked, phenylephrine gets added on. Vasopressin is a V1 agonist, typically second line agent to norepinephrine in septic shock. Dobutamine is what can be used for other issues. And the main thing with the dobutamine, it's used in heart failure and cardiogenic shock to help the heart contract a little better and a little faster. Now, the key psych medications you must know are Haldol, olanzapine, lorazepam, and Benadryl. You know that when these patients are coming in, they're acutely violent and psychotic, and they're a danger to themselves and a danger to staff. We give psych medication to help calm them down so they can help regain control. The first ones, again, are going to be Haldol, olanzapine. They're going to be the antipsychotics you most commonly know. The main thing with Haldol, though, is that it can cause QT prolongation in those EPS symptoms. Olanzapine, less QT prolongation, but it still has the EPS symptoms. You are going to be seeing that providers are going from Haldol to olanzapine just because olanzapine can be a little bit safer. Now, you also have lorazepam or the other benzos, right? Because it's also going to help sedate them, especially when they're acutely agitated and combative. You just need to monitor for oversedation and respiratory depression. Specifically, when you're combining, if you're giving olanzapine and you're giving lorazepam and you're giving the Benadryl on top of it, you need to be very watchful over the oversedation and the respiratory depression. So as soon as it's safe to place these patients on a cardiac monitor, you do so you can keep a very close eye on them. And then Benadryl is also given, helps with, it does have sedative properties, and it helps prevent those EPS symptoms as well. Now, for the advanced life support medications that you should master, because it's the bread and butter of the ER, are going to be epinephrine, amiodarone, lidocaine, atropine, magnesium sulfate, calcium chloride, dopamine, and sodium bicarbonate. Epinephrine, like we said, it's the most important medication in cardiac arrest. It's going to be 1 milligram every 3 to 5 minutes, right? As ordered by the providers, but that's a typical thing. 1 milligram every 3 to 5 minutes in cardiac arrest. Amiodarone, like we said, it's an antiarrhythmic. It's going to be used for ventricular fibrillation, pulses ventricular tachycardia, or just ventricular tachycardia as well. Lidocaine is another key antiarrhythmic. Atropine is used for symptomatic bradycardia. You know, it's 1 milligram up to a max of 3 milligrams. So if your patient's symptomatic bradycardic, meaning they're hypotensive and they're bradycardic, epinephrine should be the first medication you think of. Magnesium sulfate is going to be given for torsades. Calcium chloride, you're immediately thinking for calcium channel blocker overdose. You're immediately thinking when the patient is hyperkalemic, let's say they're dialysis, they coded. You know that dialysis, a huge risk is hyperkalemia. Hyperkalemia leads to a lot of those deadly arrhythmias. So you're thinking immediately calcium chloride. Another key one is sodium bicarbonate. You know that sodium bicarbonate is used to manage severe metabolic acidosis, and metabolic acidosis impairs cardiac function, impairs functions throughout the body. So it's given to help manage the acidosis that is occurring. Now, some of the key antidotes that you must know. For acetaminophen overdose, acetylcysteine, right? For benzodiazepines, flumazenil, opioids, we have naloxone, heparin, protamine sulfate. For warfarin, you're thinking vitamin K, FFP, prothrombin complex concentrate. For ethylene glycol and methanol, for mepizole. For insulin, of course, glucose. Beta blocker overdose, glucagon and Zofran. Calcium channel blockers, calcium gluconate. These are the antidotes you should immediately think of and start kind of pairing it as you go. If you just because your patient is bradycardic, yes, you're reaching for the atropine, anticipating all those interventions, but you also need to help figure out what's the cause of their bradycardia. Did they take too many medications, too many of their beta blocker, too much of their calcium channel blocker? So now you know what the antidotes that you can expect. And then some of the key things you need to be mindful of, you need to always be extra careful with the opioids, with blood thinners, with pressors, with blood pressure medications, benzos, insulin, and PEDS medications. Pay extra attention. With an opioid, you're monitoring for the oversedation and respiratory depression. If they are naive to opioids, you're thinking someone elderly or a pediatric patient, you need to be extra careful, double verify the dose. Specifically, also blood thinners, because it can lead to something that can cause a patient to have serious harm. Same thing with pressors, blood pressure medications, benzos, insulins, and PEDS. For your BP meds, don't just give them, even if it's PO, check a blood pressure beforehand, because if the blood pressure is low, you give a BP med, you're just going to lower it further. Benzos, again, you're watching for that oversedation, respiratory depression. For insulins, check the sugar also beforehand. If your patient's 80 on the glucose, you're not going to give him more insulin, right? Even if they're 90, you're not going to give him more insulin. You're going to drive him into hypoglycemia. And as you know, that can be very deadly. And for PEDS medications, always have an accurate weight, and then double verify the dosing with a second nurse to make sure it's correct, right? Because our kiddos are very sensitive, and you don't want to accidentally give them too much of a medication. You're always going to ask about allergies beforehand, because once you give it, you can't take it back. So always ask about allergies beforehand. If you don't know what you're giving, you must look it up. Ask a buddy nurse, ask your preceptor, ask someone more experienced, talk to even pharmacy, but look it up, know what you're giving your patients. And if you have any questions, call your pharmacist, like we said, and make sure that you get their name.